One today, what I would like to talk about is about the comfort women of the World War II. So basically, just getting into the topic. Why do I want to talk about this topic? Uh, the necessity of talking about this topic come from the way I was introduced to it. So I was watching one of the videos of Stephanie Sue. If any of you know about her, she's the one who covers and documents many of these, cases around the globes about. She has covered, I think, some numerous one. You cannot categorize into anything, but she has covered a lot of cases, a lot of stories, a lot of documentaries around the globe. So if you want to go watch it, watch about if you're interested in thriller or if you're interested in, just real life non-fiction stories, and you can watch it out. But that's how I was introduced to the term comfort woman. Another first thought when I first heard it, what first came to my mind was nothing. It was a word because I was like, what do you possibly mean by comfort women? Are these girls like nurses or are they, therapists or some kind of a sort of a thing? That because I would say that the if even if you hear the term comfort woman, that's the first inferred meaning that you would get out of it, most possibly. But basically, when I studied it and I discussed it, I got to know that it basically the term comfort woman is an apprehensium. If you know about what apprehensium is, basically a term that is a lighter way of introducing something that has much more intensity. For example, if you're calling out a disabled person, that you won't then you won't be saying then calling them out as a disabled person. Instead, you will use the apprehensium for specially able. So that's what you would call them. So the same thing is used over here. Basically, the comfort women were the women who were forced into sex slave, or if were forced into, this sex slave because of the war that has happened, World War II, where the Japanese government won over the Koreans and the Chinese. So that's how they got the occupation. From there, they drove over, young ladies, and they got them into a ship. And from that ship, they got over to a camp. And in their camp, they were, introduced to all of this stuff where they had to signed a kind of serve the men on the house, the men who were uh, officials, who were the recruiters, who were the army men, so they were to serve them as their sex slaves, and that's how this term is inferred. It's not. I think so it's kind of horrifying when I first heard of it, and that's why I think so it's very important to talk about it because many of the things that we see in our history and we're still seeing today is how you would try to, like, especially if you're talking in terms of those eastern countries, because how these terms, how these miseries, how these atrocities are, you know, what do you call them, less intensified, and how they're amplified to a level where we cannot reach them out as something, because you would never heard of, you would have heard about World War II, you have heard about World War One, you have heard about all the genocides that has happened, you have heard about this and you heard about that in your history books, but no one ever come around told you about what comfort women are and why were they an important part of our history, because this cover up a lot of our history, even if you're not talking it about from that type of a perspective. I would like to mention about that one movie that I watched. Well, it's not a movie; it's a web series by Sanjanina Bansari Hiramandi, and here they covered about how the the wives over here, which are the courtesans, were put up into, that kind of position where they had a choice and they had the authority to help out the officials in order to turn it out as a revolution for us. And I because we have heard a lot of personality, we studied about it since in our childhood about how there were many people involved in the revolution to the making of Pakistan and India in order to get independence. But have you ever heard about these women? Yeah, what that I see right here is no, we have not heard about these women that we have come across. There were many of them, and we don't know about any of them. So that's what I want to talk about today. How these comfort women were used, and how did it get up there, and what effects did it leave on our society. So just starting off the hidden atrocity as it starts, and I've also told you most about it as early as soon. So I have told you the given dates that I have over here is 1932 and 1945. An estimated of this is an estimated amount because we are actually not aware of how many women and girls were forced into this slavery by the Imperial Japanese government. And so I've already discussed this one thing, and after that, we have seen how brutally they were taken up. I've told you how they were taken up from their, their homes or वहाँ से वो लेके गई थी, and then they have gotten up into ships, and they were told that they're going to be nurses and they're going to be given, a place where they can nurture and they can make an earning out for their families, and that's what they thought. Because I heard this one interview from a woman who was a comfort woman from that time. I think so. It was between 1933 or something. So she was also put up into one of these comfort stations, and what she was told was that to her family that she was a nurse. She was going to be a nurse. She was going to be put up in one of those hospitals. When she was taken up, she was got into a ship, and she did not know where they were going. She had no one with her, no family member, no one she knew there was her family member or a friend of hers. So she was all alone, and she was wondering where they're taking her. And once they reached, she found out, like, it was a horrible situation. I've heard it all, but we cannot be that, I think, so explicit or graphic over here. So it was just basically entering the comfort station and getting to know that what the work was being done over here, and it was recorded by her. She told in that interview that she gave earlier on, I think so, 10 years ago. It has many views, I think so. I don't remember the name of the person because it's in Korean and I'm terribly bad at remembering names. But she told about how she was put up in there and how she had to serve about, since for 9 a.m. From 9 a.m. to about 5 p.m. in the evening, she had to be there put up continuously, and she had to be there till her legs were worn out and could not even walk. And that was a horrible situation, and I've already told you about how these women were taken from Korea, China, the Philippines, and Indonesia, uh, that and they were told that they will be put up into, उनको nurses की duties दी जाएंगी, ये करवाया जाएगा, वो करवाया जाएगा, लेकिन none of this happened, and they were end up into sexual slavery. And I've already told you about this term, how this term was allegedly in harming opprobrium that was used to mask the reality of the government possessed sponsored sexual violence and the military rape camps. And then early on, okay, so this is the woman that I mentioned who was 13 years old, and like if you're seeing a Korean, because in Korean age you always add up 1 year to your Western age. So she was 14 years old when she was abducted from Korea while running a simple rank. She was trafficked across border and forced into a military brothel, and that's what I told you about, that she was living under very heavy conditions, and how the inhuman condition there was of her taking place over here, her courage in speaking out later about this historical prevention after she got to know that the deal that was signed up and the money was offered between the two parties of the Korean government and the German government in order to for the exchange and to settle this matter down. But that never really worked. So, and after that, moving on, the system behind the horror. So, like sometimes even I wonder about this one point that, like, I used to watch this one channel, like, still do sometimes when I want a bit of, I don't know, just stimulation in my life. There's this one channel who, catches up cheaters, the cheaters that cheat on their partners. And it's always like whenever the cheater is caught, they make a very, weird kind of excuses. And the same thing I see over open hand, because, there's one thing when the person feels ashamed for what they have done and they want to admit it. But there's one thing where they do not want to admit it and they just let it be. So here also Japan plays that role very well. And they say that the military justified the system by claiming that it would reduce rape crimes. Mind you, this was a rape camp that they put up, which they call the comfort camps, against local populations and control the diseases among soldiers to prevent sexual violence. And it's very inhuman, and we have seen it also that how many of these victims were as young as 11 years old. I've told you already about these cases. उनकी एज बहुत छोटी होती थी, and they were just taken away from the false promises that they will be given factory work, nursing work, a good pay, and they will be put up into good places upon their arrivals. But that did not happen, and we all know what happened. But it's still not up in their textbooks, and That's the bad part about history, because if you're ever talking about history or thinking about history, but you can never be sure if it truly happens. It takes a lot of guts to speak out what has happened, to know that there would be someone who would still defy you after knowing all that you've gone through. Now, taking up furthermore, we would like to discuss about the consequences, which is the chapter 2 over here. When 90% of these women did not survive because of the violence, the disease, and the malnutrition which happened during all of this was taking place, the mental because I told you about that the distress is not only physical, it's mental also. And the irony is that how they've mentioned that these camps were put up in order to prevent the disease, but this was ultimately resulted into, you know, an atrocity which resulted into these comfort women getting injuries, chronic pain, severe depression, and other psychological trauma that we have discussed earlier, because they were put up in from a long age. तो वो अगर देखे, for instance, the woman that I told you about, she was put up in this camp when she was 11 years old, or no, sorry, not 11. She was 13 years old, and she was gotten out when she got to be 21. So you would know how long did it take for her to get over that trauma. And even now she remembers that she would cry, and that's what we saw in the interview also, because that's how horrible the situation exactly was. You cannot get that trauma out of a person who was there for such a long time and such a long period of as long as 9 and 8 years. Uh, for the first 7 years, she was a sex slave over there in one of those stations. But at the last year that they had over there, when Japan got the was surrendered, तो जब वो हुआ, when Japan surrendered, they had to basically erase any traces that they had once set up this comfort women camp, and they were actually, allegedly raping all these women, and now they have to erase the trace that such a thing was happening at their side. So they basically transferred the comfort women from the camp to the hospital, which was closed after 1 year, and that's where the woman left. And then after the isolation that we have talked about, is that this one woman that we have previously discussed in all of these matters as a source of example, or a source of you know we've discussed it before. So it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of gut for you to talk about such a serious issue would have impacted your life and impacted the life of your loved one. Because even when that woman told her mother about all this happened, because she was asking, why are you not getting married? And she was like that, I just don't want to get married. And she was like that, okay, you have to give a reason of why you don't you want to get married. And then she put up it in front of her mother what has happened to her, and that she cannot get married now. We all know the reason why, and that's what she put up in front of her and even mother, because how the enigma that is set up in our society, especially the Eastern society, the dystopian narrative that we have over here, that if a woman is convicted of any type of sexual relation between, like, even if it's rape, which is an irony, but still as it is, like, even if it's such an horrible misery which is turned out for the woman's life and not for the men, so even if that's the situation, people would judge her. So that's the type of, taboo that they carry around with themselves. And that's one of the quotes that the woman from those comfort station had to say, that we have no choice but to carry the cross of shame for decades while the persecutors live freely. And that's the irony, like whenever we talk about tragedy, and if you have seen the symbolism for tragedy, like I cannot put up over here in the slides because I'm recording right now, but you would always see the two phases. Like it's never one phase. If you have seen the cinematic symbolism of tragedy, it's always a happy phase and a symbolic and very expressive dull phase that is given over here as a contrast. So tragedy is, I think so, and I strongly believe is an action where humans are performing such inhuman actions, and that's what I always believe, because I've seen kindness here and there. I see kindness in the way that, I've seen animals, like I've seen cats, I've seen dogs, and I've seen all these kind of. I see someone wrestling, but whatever. I've seen kindness over here. I've seen kindness in, everything that you see. Because if you look with the eye of love, then you will find love everyone around you, everywhere around you. But then it's all about those people who, make people suffer a lot. And it's an irony because I've only seen two type of people. One who are incredibly inhuman, and the second category fall in those victims who are, the victims who got carried away by these inhuman actions. And that's distressing because whoever gets power, and as it's mentioned, I quote this a lot, I think so, from Animal Farm, that the one who always gets the power will always misuse it. And that's what we see happening also. Now here we see that in August 1991, there was this one survivor who publicly spoke out. I think so we have discussed it before, so we'll just be moving on. Now the Japan's controversial response, and yeah, so basically what has happened कि उन्होंने कहा कि वो apology as it is नहीं देंगे. उन्होंने पैसे दे दिए थे, उनको कहा था कि बस this is a पैसे, तो आप इसको accept कर लें, मामला यहीं पर resolve हो जाता है. But then it turned out as an outrage कि वो like, what do you mean by our women got violated, हमारी आपने इज्जत violate कर दी और अब आप कहते हो कि ये पैसे हैं रख लो. What do you mean by that? Even if the government was ready to deal with that, but the people were not, because they knew what truth was, and they were not going to accept it as it is. So these are the global advocacy memorials and educations for that. Like what the most inhuman essence that I even see in these acts is that you have to prove that they really exist. It's very saddening. Like, first of all, something such a misery has happened to you, and then you have to prove that it has happened to you, because no one is going to believe you if you don't have a proof in your hand that, okay, this has happened. The same thing that happens when a woman goes to the court and says that she was raped, and just because she does not have any evidence, that, what do you call it? That, that is dismissed whatsoever, blank. तो दैट इज द थिंग अबाउट कि इस तरह के जो कंफर्ट वुमेन के केसेस थे, उससे पहले जो हमारा होलोकास्ट हुआ था, तो उसमें जितने भी केसेस होते हैं, यू हैव टू प्रूव दैट ओके दीज थिंग्स एक्चुअली हैपन फॉर इट टू टेक प्लेस. एंड दैट्स इन itself, to get justice in such a world that we live in is very hard. It's such a courageous act to take justice over here, because not everyone can do that. Injustice is, I think so. Many of the people that I've seen around me, and I see today also, I was recently reading about this one woman who got cheated upon, and she was sitting across and she was talking about the man that cheated on her, and she was talking about how he was, he is a YouTuber, so we know about him, it's all public. So that guy that she was talking about was hungry, and he was hungry for money, and he was very greedy, in fact. So I think so that when people become severely attached to materialistic things that we see, they lose their sense of being. And I think so that's a fact about humans being inhuman, because that's such an ironic, that's such an oxymoronic scenario that we have put up, that human in itself is such, like some humans that we've seen, they're so inhuman, you cannot believe it. They don't even sense that kind of slightest emotion, that the empathy that you feel for the other person. Because I think so, like, we as humans, we are made up of, the people that we surround ourselves with, and the people, because I would say that for a materialistic person, people won't matter to him. So they're surrounded by the materialistic achievements or sponsors, or the, like, materialistic stuff that they're surrounding with. So that just fills the void in their heart also, and that's what makes them so emotionless and inhuman. And that's what I see in these pieces too. Okay, that you have to really fight for justice, or else nobody's gonna believe you, nobody's gonna trust you, nobody's gonna care about you, nobody gives, like, they don't care if you get justice or not. So for this, a statue of peace by some of the humanly human was set up, and then there were also in the U.S. House of Representatives, They passed the resolution to acknowledge and apologize the historical responsibility and advocacy groups were put up as the NGOs we see over here, the Presidents for Justice and the Human Rights Lessons, all what we do, we remember from the conflict women today. And that's all that I have to say about this one issue. Okay, the legacy remains, the honor, the dignity, and the courage, and what we have seen and violated from these cages. This theory amusing. Bye bye.